Well, good afternoon. Live with Dr. JJ at Manor Road United Church. We're Friday afternoon, the Manor Speaker Series. And we have quite an interesting, we have a schedule shift today, but it's going to be quite exciting. And over to Susan, who is our wonderful host.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yes, we have a performance. Ellen Schwartzel, who is the president of the Toronto Field Naturalists, who is going to be talking about the wonderful network of ravines and nature trails and that we have in our city and what we can do to make sure that they stay on. So hope you enjoy.
And this is we're rebroadcasting an old episode, so there we go.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm with the Toronto Field Naturalists. I'm the president of the Toronto Field Naturalists, and I'm also a son from Bloor Street United Church. So hello, neighbors. And it's great that we can get together today to talk about Toronto's ravines, which is what I really want to focus on. And I hope soon we may be able to explore the ravines together. Meanwhile, I encourage you and your families and friends to discover a ravine near you. And I know that we're spread all over the city today. I heard Downsview, I heard Merton Street. So it's not just one locality. But the ravines are definitely a place to find nature in the middle of a big city. So we know, of course, that every city has special places. Toronto has the Great Thames River with many famous bridges. And Ottawa has the Rideau Canal, which is wonderful in winter when you can skate for miles. I've done that myself. Vancouver has, of course, all that great oceanside beach territory and Stanley Park as well. So that's terrific. But Toronto has ravines. And we have over 11,000 hectares of beautiful green, natural forested lands. And that's nature at our footsteps, at our doorsteps. And I think today I just want to focus on the ravines, although there's other great parkland as well. And we can talk about what the ravines do for us and also what we can do for the ravines. For a start, I encourage all of us to visit Toronto's ravines. Now that may seem obvious, but in fact, not everybody knows that the ravines are there and available to us. About 60% of Toronto's ravine lands are public lands, so they're open to all. And there are over 500 kilometers of trails that are spread throughout the ravine network. And about half of those are paved, so they're easy to use, and there's signage. And again, as I say, we will often find ravines close to our homes. Toronto ravines are definitely for families. Mind you, they're also for joggers, they're for cyclists, they're for people who want to stroll slowly and really experience nature, and for those who want to exercise and move fast. So lots and lots of people enjoy Toronto's ravines, and you won't be alone on the trails. So let's look a little bit at the trail system generally. This gives you a big map of the area, and you'll see that Toronto's ravines are natural green valleys running through our city. Each ravine has a river or a creek flowing along the bottom, of course, and Toronto's rivers have their beginnings up north in their headwaters, so to speak, in the area of the Oak Ridges moraines. So up here in a landscape of forested hills and mingled with farmlands and wetlands. So this is the area of the Oak Ridges moraine and the Greenbelt. And governments and community groups of all kinds have worked hard to keep this area protected from development. Let's look a bit more closely at Toronto's river systems. So again, the rivers flow from north to south into Lake Ontario, of course. And what we have is the Humber River in the west, the Don in the middle, more or less east of Yonge Street, and we have the Rouge on the east end. So those are the three major rivers. And the Humber, the Don, and the Rouge, they all flow into Lake Ontario, as I said. So our ravines form a network for nature, for water, and for wildlife. They connect the Oak Ridges Moraine to Lake Ontario, and that's important. The ravines, with their forests and meadows, they connect and protect our water. They slow the water down, they keep it cool, and they help to filter the water. Toronto's rivers begin underground, again, way up there on the Oak Ridges Moraine, and under those hills, we have a lot of gravel that was laid down or left behind by the last ice ages, thousands of years ago. And that gravel holds a lot of clean groundwater. And all that groundwater is the beginning of Toronto's rivers. As the rivers flow south, of course, more and more of their watersheds are covered in buildings and pavement, roads, parking lots, sidewalks. So Toronto's watersheds are mostly paved over, and there's less and less green space to soak up the rain and to hold it. If we look around the next time we're out, we notice how much of our streets are paved over, even in residential areas. There are only patches of green space left often. And in downtown areas like here around the Royal Ontario Museum, there are really only rare patches of exposed soil in planters. All that hard pavement means that snow and rainwater runs off roads, buildings, rooftops, parking lots, sidewalks, and it goes directly into the storm sewers and from there into the creeks and rivers. It runs off really fast because there's little or no soil to soak it up and hold it and let it slow down. Like many other cities, Toronto has been seeing more flooding in recent years. And partly that is just because so much of our land has been paved over. Partly it's also a reality of a changing climate. We are getting more intense weather, including heavier rainstorms. Together, the paved over land plus the changing climate means we see more flooding. Floods can happen very fast and cause a lot of damage. This flood happened on Finch Avenue in 2005. So this was one of 8 extreme weather events that had happened in the previous 20 years. And it was a record rainfall. It caused flash flooding and washed out a portion of Finch Avenue, but also caused problems in major problems in Highland Creek. There was damage to public and private property estimated between $400 and $500 million. And it also flooded over 4,200 basements and damaged stream banks, creeks, trees, parklands. And of course, what you see here are all the utilities that were broken. It was a major event. Now, this event we may remember, this was more recently, this was July 8, 2013. And on that storm event, many rivers and creeks in Toronto area flooded, and the GO train line in the Don Valley flooded. It stranded 1,400 GO passengers for over 7 hours, and it also flooded over 4,700 basements across the city. And the cost estimates there range up into $1 billion. So stormwater that comes off events like this or any sort of summer storm is not so clean. As it washes through the streets, it carries all the dirt and trash that had built up during the previous storm. Invisible pollutants like road salt are also dissolved in the stormwater. During a summer rainstorm, our stormwater also mixes with sewage because we have combined sewers in the older parts of Toronto. So what gets washed into Lake Ontario after a storm is a mix of stormwater and untreated sewage. So this is a panorama photo, and it shows what Toronto Harbor looked like after one of these summer storms in 2015, when that mix of stormwater and sewage gets washed into the lake. Now, of course, we also want to keep in mind that our drinking water, Toronto's drinking water, comes from Lake Ontario. It's drawn from Lake Ontario. So we have all kinds of reasons to keep our lake healthy and our water clean. So if you consider all of that, we know that Toronto's ravines have a huge job to do to help absorb, slow down, store, cool, and filter Toronto's stormwater before it flows into Lake Ontario. Without our forested ravines, we know that our flooding problems would be a lot worse. The city knows the ravines are a huge asset, but they have never yet been able to put a dollar value on the services that our ravines provide. These days, though, the city managers are actually working on exactly that, on doing an economic benefit analysis of the ravines. So far, what I've talked about in terms of the ravines is more the ravines as essentially part of our civil engineering. They're like the ravines wearing hard hats, the tough, hard job that they do for us. And I think what I want to talk about now are more of the soft services that the ravines provide to us that are no less important. Because we know that in Toronto, nature changes dramatically over the seasons. We know that we're just about to head into a season of big changes. And every month brings wonderful new developments in nature, and the ravines let us enjoy all those changes up close. In spring, for example, we can find trilliums and other ephemeral spring flowers in the ravines. And of course, the trilliums are the official flower for Ontario. But in the fall as well, the beautiful fall colors that tourists come to this part of the world to see, we can enjoy them in our backyards, essentially. So the autumn is a particularly wonderful time to visit the ravines and to learn how the natural world gets ready for winter. Kids can enjoy the fall leaves too. They may want to jump into the leaves, or they can make art collages with them. In winter, our ravines can be especially beautiful. Our ravines let us enjoy nature all year round, and that's important because our winters are just so very long. Toronto's ravines include large forest trees, wetlands, wooded hillsides, and open grasslands. So quite a range of terrain. And that means that many different kinds of birds with many different needs can all find conditions that suit them well. Shelter, food, habitat, nesting materials, it's all there in the ravines for them. And as well, the ravines are safe green pathways that they can use to travel when they migrate, for example, north in the spring into Northern Ontario, or if they're migrating south towards the lake, they can use the ravines as green corridors. Of course, we all know people who love birds. Maybe we're bird watchers ourselves. And for many, birds are their favorite way to connect with nature. Even in winter, some people travel thousands of kilometers to add to their bird lists, but Toronto ravines are actually a very good place to do birding. Over 140 species of birds are known to actually nest in the Toronto area. So they raise their families here. And a far larger number of birds just come through in a migratory way. So over 320 species of birds have been seen at Tommy Thompson Park, and that's the Leslie Street Spit. Kids are naturally curious about birds as well. Even very small kids can get excited about birds. Birds are a great way to introduce kids to nature. Ravines provide food for birds and other animals at all seasons. This happens to be a chokecherry, and it's a bush in the rose family, and the berries aren't very tasty to humans, but robins love them, other kinds of birds love them. Later in the season, we'll find dogwood berries in the ravines. And again, dogwood berries are great food for wildlife, including cardinals, cedar waxwings, grosbeaks, finches. So these native shrubs provide all kinds of great food resources for birds and other wildlife. Some types of birds in Toronto, they stay all year round. And the ravines are especially very important to birds that need forested habitat. The nuthatch is one example, and you can hear from the name, the nuthatch, that its food is often nuts and seeds. We're all familiar with the cardinal, it's a wonderful bright red bird, and it lives in Toronto all year round as well, and often likes habitat in the ravines. Other birds raise their families much further north and only come to the Toronto area and to the ravines in the winter. Juncos would be one example. So they go north again in the spring. They just essentially, they shelter in the ravines for the winter. Now, warblers are a group of birds that migrate often very, very long distances. And a large number of species of warblers come through Toronto in the migratory time. And some of them come from as far away as Central or even South America. The tiny blackpoll warbler, for example, and it weighs only about 12 grams, it flies an annual round trip of about 20,000 kilometers from the boreal forests of North America to its winter home in the Amazon basin. Another really small bird, the Canada warbler, breeds in Ontario too, but it winters in Ecuador and Peru as far south as Lima. Canada warblers can be found in flocks high up in the Andes Mountains, but during migration, we can sometimes see them in Toronto ravines. In Toronto, spring bird migration begins in March, so right about now is when we can start looking. But the best time, the peak time for bird migration is mid-May in Toronto. Ravines are safe places for many birds to raise families. Some species of birds, they're evolved to nest on the ground. And so for them, dogs, especially off-leash dogs, are a real problem. So in Toronto, there are a few places where fences have been put up in an effort to protect ground nesting birds and give them a safe place to nest. Ravines are places where we can see wildlife close up. And it may be something as simple as a butterfly, this black swallowtail, for example. Or sometimes we may just see signs of wildlife and need to interpret them. This chewed up tree stump, for example, maybe a beaver cut through the line somewhere. So, but the point I was making really is that there are often things to see in the ravines that are not necessarily furry animals directly, but they're evidence. And that's a nice feeling too. So now, sometimes, if we're lucky, we may see nature far away as well. Deer are obviously shy animals, but sometimes we can see them in the ravines. Now, deer incidentally love to eat trilliums, so those early spring flowers that come up early when there's not much else green, they get munched preferentially. So if we have too many deer in an ecosystem like the ravine system, our trilliums tend to dwindle and may disappear altogether. So it's one of those, those interesting interactions. And obviously there are interactions of every kind. We know that trees and squirrels need each other, and there are so many different mutual needs. But an interesting reality is that people need nature too. We really do need it. Toronto ravines let us enjoy nature in our everyday lives. Often we can walk from our homes to a ravine or get there by TTC. And it's really important for our mental health. Increasingly, we're seeing even medical doctors issuing nature prescriptions. In other words, saying, you should get out for a walk a couple times a week. It'll do you good. Get out into nature. And many studies have been done and have been compiled showing that spending time in nature can make us feel more relaxed. It reduces stress levels. It gives us more energy. makes us more creative, and improves sleep. So all of those elements are really important. Ravines also connect us with the past. Our ravines are much, much older than the city itself. So this steep quarried hillside at the brickworks, it may not look like much in the photo, but it actually offers an exciting window into the deep, deep past. In fact, this north slope is so important that it has been named a World Heritage UNESCO site. The site was made famous by Toronto geologist A.P. Coleman, who discovered that the quarry wall showed a complete record of the past 130,000 years. It also showed that our area has been covered by glaciers, not just once, but several times. So, and that the climate warmed up considerably in between those two ice ages. And that was quite a remarkable thing to discover, because often a second ice age will wipe out any evidence that was left beforehand. And so to have a record in the geology that shows that interglacial period, that was very exciting to geologists. And this is sort of a graphic depiction of what was observed when geologists examined that quarry slope. And another thing that Coleman discovered at the very bottom of that, in the bottom geologic layer, was the tooth of a giant beaver in the very oldest layers. So there were giant beavers living in this area, weighing about 200 pounds, about the size of a beaver, living here 130,000 years ago. Now, of course, they didn't live here all by themselves. There was a whole ecosystem. There were bison, there were giant bears. And so it was a whole world that is lost now, but that we have a record for, and that we can visit virtually in downtown Toronto. And here is a depiction of that ancient beaver skull to give you a sense of the size compared to a modern beaver.
Wow.
Now, ravines are also important to Indigenous groups. For thousands of years, these lands have been the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Indigenous peoples had a strong relationship with the land and the rivers north of Lake Ontario. They farmed many crops where the soil was good, and the soil was good in a lot of places. And they cared for trees that provided nuts, fruit, and woods of various kinds. And walnuts were one of the types of trees that they favored and that they tended. For Indigenous nations, local rivers also connected their trails and their trade routes. They fished rivers such as the Don River for salmon and other fish, and they hunted the marshlands around the river mouths like Ashbridges Bay for duck, muskrat, and deer. So this was a really good land. Now we know that, of course, in the 1800s, European settlers began to build many lumber mills along the Humber River. Forests of white pine were mostly cut down. And today, what we have on the Humber River, for example, are the remnants of an old mill and the old mill bridge that are reminders of that time. In the 19th century, many more mills were built along the Humber and Don rivers. The mills used water power to saw logs, make paper, grind grain. And so the ravines became major industrial areas. In fact, a very large brick factory and a quarry were built in the Don Valley because really good clay was found right there. And at one time, the Don Valley Brickworks supplied most of the bricks for the buildings in Toronto. At one point, about 100 years ago, this was the largest brick factory on the continent. Many men worked there. The brickworks finally closed in the 1980s, and they left behind the factory buildings, extensive areas of rubble, and a huge deep hole. Meanwhile, on another valley in the Don Valley, Sun Valley, a garbage dump was established in the 1950s, and through the 1960s, it received hundreds of truckloads of garbage a day. In some spots, the garbage was 25 meters deep. So there were a lot of sites on our ravines that were treated that way. Back to that large hole at the old brickworks. A few people had a vision that really this site should be restored. And Evergreen formed a partnership with the city, with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and with philanthropists too. And the quarry hole was filled in over time. Among other things, the Scotia Plaza excavation, which produced an enormous amount of underground excavate, was used to fill in this quarry. And as a result of that vision and all that hard work and collaboration, the brickworks have been cleaned up and they are now really beautiful again, restored to nature. There are snapping turtles in these wetlands and beavers. So we really are the beneficiaries of that vision. Toronto ravines still need a lot of help though. The city continues to grow really quickly, and projects like roads, sewers, and public transit often run right through the ravines because that is the route of least resistance, you could say. People don't live there. And here's just one current example. In East Toronto, Metrolinx is expanding rail service for commuters. And of course, that's an important and laudable goal. The challenge is, though, that in order to produce a retaining wall, hundreds of trees in this ravine will be cut down. And people who live nearby want to save those trees. They've put ribbons around them in order to depict how much damage will be caused by this construction. And the neighbors are asking for a construction plan that doesn't destroy so much of the ravine. But this is really just one example. In a city our size, there are challenges for the ravine system almost everywhere you look in terms of infrastructure, building, and maintenance. Another challenge that we find across the ravine system is erosion, because the ravines are in many places used so well and they are quite steep. The paths just become eroded. The plants can't grow there anymore. The eroded bare dirt washes down the hillsides and the trees' roots become exposed. And so the trees begin to fail and it becomes a vicious cycle. So eroded paths are a problem right across the city. Litter is another perennial problem in our ravines. Plastic, we know, sticks around for a very, very long time, even though it may break down into little bits. And so tiny bits of plastic are now everywhere in our rivers and lakes. As well, we have new types of weedy plants that have been introduced from Europe and Asia, and they can quickly take over vast areas of ravine land because the native insects and the native wildlife just prefer to eat something else. And so Toronto has many kinds of invasive weeds, whether it's buckthorn or European common reed or Japanese knotweed. So garlic mustard is just one example, unfortunately. Dogs, the city has a lot of dogs, and dogs running off their leashes, they will scare birds, as I mentioned, and other wildlife. But they can also, just by running through the undergrowth, they can spread the seeds of those invasive weeds in their paws and in their fur. And so that contributes to the weeds being spread even faster. Toronto has at least 230,000 dogs. And with the pandemic, for example, we know that many people have bought pandemic puppies, so to speak. And of course, people need pets. They're important companions, but it's more the way that the dogs are exercised and allowed to roam free in the ravines that is the challenge. Toronto uses a lot of road salt in the winter, and that's terrible for trees and for other plants. So salt is also bad for fish, frogs, and all the aquatic insects that have their larval stages in the creeks and rivers. And we know that the tonnages of road salt that the city uses are just stupendous. So all in all, the people who have studied ravines have been telling city managers for quite some time about all these problems and the neglect and the challenges. And the message was clear that the ravines need help. And the weeds that invaded the ravines, they were a sign that the city had to act. So to address all that public concern, city managers wrote a strategy and they promised that things would change. Of course, money is going to be needed to bring the ravines back to health. And so money has been promised, and there's hope that it will really start flowing. And we can all get involved to help, to speak to our counselors about that, and also to be volunteers where we see the value for that. Where we can start really is by getting to know our ravines, especially the ones near where we live. And often the easiest way to do that is to go to the City of Toronto website and search for walking, cycling, hiking. And what you'll find there is descriptions of some of the more popular trails and where they start. And you'll also see maps of the city, the east and the west. And this is an area that's around Manor Road United, and the happy face is sort of roughly where the church is. So you get a sense of all those brown lines are the ravine trails that are close by. But the whole city has them. Another good way to discover the ravines is to come on a guided walk with the Toronto Field Naturalists. In normal years, the Toronto Field Naturalists runs over 140 guided walks all over Toronto's ravine system. Our walks are free to our members, and visitors can come too. And we have walks in winter months as well. We run them all through the season. During the pandemic, of course, we had to shut down our walks, and they're shut at this time. But once public health rules allow, we will go back to leading small groups, about 10 or less, and everyone will be wearing masks. So do check our website to find out when our walks begin again, because we can't say for sure when that will be. Our volunteer guides can tell you all about the plants and the animals and the history of the ravines. And we can tell you about the odd plants like Jack in the Pulpit that you'll see in the spring in some areas. And we'll also help to make you alert to areas, patches of poison ivy, and keep you out of those areas. Our volunteers also work with the city and other groups to control invasive weeds. And here you see the European common weed in the background. It's a particularly difficult one to control. It needs specialized help. And so we don't do this in isolation. We do this very much in partnership with city staff. Our members also help clean up garbage in the ravines. And of course, there's many, probably close to 100 different volunteer groups who help to maintain garbage control in the ravines. And our volunteers also work with the city to plant native trees and other plants. We offer programs for kids as well. Kids are very important to us, and so we've always run a junior naturalist program. And in fact, Robert Bateman, who is one of Canada's best known artists, wildlife artists, he was in his youth a student with the junior naturalists of TFN, and later became an instructor. And he felt that it helped to form him and his passion. And so we never know who might be coming through as a kid and will become a passionate lover of nature as they grow up. TFN has been around for almost 100 years now, and we've always seen our mission as connecting people with nature in the Toronto area. today the work of the Toronto Field Naturalists is more important than ever. And we are all still just volunteers. We have no staff. And you can find more about us at our website, as I said. And there's our website. And do consider becoming a member, especially at this time of year where you get almost 15 months worth of membership if you join around this time of year. So it's a bargain as well as being a really good investment in nature. In the meantime, if you explore Toronto's ravines on your own, just keep in mind that you want to stay on the trails and take your litter out and keep your dog on a leash. And that will go a long way to being gentle on our ravine systems. So we really do hope that our volunteer walk leaders will soon be able to show you some of Toronto's wonderful ravines. And so now I'm happy to chat and take questions and comments and observations. This is often where I learn most of all is in the conversation with others. So these have all been volunteer photographers who contributed here. And so we have a lot of photographers who help us. So thanks very much.
It's good to hear from Ellen again. Unfortunately, we can't ask her any questions, but I sort of reminded us we're looking forward to the snow melting and getting out there again in the it's hard to imagine that some of that goes back 100,000 years and so. And I think we're really working at trying to be more conscious of how much green space and integrating more green space in the city. Now, does anyone have any comments or insights from what they heard again?
For me, it was the first time because I hadn't seen it when it was originally aired, and it was really lovely. I think she did a great job, and I love the ravines in the area here. I'm looking forward to Hyde Park again and all these different things in the island. So we're very, very, very lucky here in Toronto with all this space.
We're very fortunate, especially when you walk out to she did Tommy Thompson Park to Leslie Spit, and there's a 5-kilometer walk out that. It's quite remarkable. And also another easy access into the ravine walk system. Well, actually two that I can think about. When you cross the St. Clair Bridge, and if you walked from the St. Clair subway station east, you actually there's a bridge you pass over, and if you look straight down, there's this wonderful river below you, and suddenly you're transported to another place. And also Pottery Road is another lovely access in 2 points. If you drive down the Bayview extension, you'll often see people parked over on the other side, the east side of Bayview, and they're actually there's a massive area that's connected to the Don River there. And one way into that is to Pottery Road. And you can see both on the north side and south side of Pottery Road leads to that wonderful spot where you think you're almost in Northern Ontario. And apparently another way into that is if you go over to Millwood, south of Laird, or Millwood goes south, where the Loblaws parking lot is. You can actually access the other end of that other cluster of walkways in the area, which is quite. Apparently, if you go along in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, there's a path that connects with the old K. Gardner Belt rail line, if I'm not mistaken, and again another walk path, which is quite remarkable. Certainly. Any other thoughts or ideas?
Yes, it's the Nordheimer ravine that's off of St. Clair and
that ravine, okay, right, yeah.
And it's a wonderful place to walk.
And isn't there the way into that, and I might get the street wrong, because sometimes you know where the streets are, but you can't remember the names of them. When you go east of Yonge, there's a street that's adjacent to the ravine that runs north and south that curves around and runs back into Yonge Street. But there's I think an access point that lets you walk more gently down into the ravine. Do you remember the name of that street by any chance, Susan?
No, it's been a while, but I used to live up in that area, and I seem to recall that there's an exit from the St. Clair West station that access the ravine.
It lets you go down. Yeah, and I see. I think is it Susan Logie she's in the Dominican Republic right now. I think she logged in. There's a mirror, and Carolyn and Debbie Van Beek. Of course, Nina's there and Debbie Danbrook. And well, it's quite wonderful. Well, okay, so I want to say thank you for being here, and I'll pass it back over to Susan Johnson, who will tell you what's on for next week.
Right. Next week, we're looking forward to Dr. Olivia Smith, who with her mother is just so talented in creating. She sews, she puts beautiful things together. So she's going to show us hopefully some of her work, and hope you can all make it then.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I think, Nina, are you there? All right. It's just
Thank you,
so,
Reverend Dr. Jones.
Thank you, everybody. And so we'll sign off for now, and hopefully
We'll see you on Facebook.
I recommend, speaking of walking, it's sunny out there, and it's even though it's below zero, it's quite beautiful with the snow. It's beginning to melt a bit, but it looks like a bit like a winter wonderland. So take care, everybody, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.